Welcome back. You have arrived at Direct Station, where politics and planets collide and converge. I am Kate Carey. If this is your first time, hi, and thank you for being here. It's a good time to gather and discuss the soup we're in. So, what this show is about is looking at the things we're living through and make meaning of them by understanding the sky context. The sky is a history too, you see, and it correlates with what's going on down here in really cool ways that are worth knowing about. And I find that looking into it a little bit here and there helps me cope with what unfolds when it's hard and leverage opportunity when it's there and relish in gifts when they come. So for you, no matter who you are or how you tend to orient to either news or astrology or astrology adjacent topics, I work to be a bridge between the two worlds and give a bit of info from each side so that it all makes just a little bit more sense each time we talk. Either way, I'm hoping it's also useful to you if you do follow both astrology and news, but are looking for a spot to sit and notice how everything's going. To wonder about why, to try to make meaning, and to really honestly just truly find some hope in either the humans or the bodies in the sky. Usually both, though. So I'm a person who tracks both quite easily, or I should say, I'm a person who tracks both quite closely, and who lives in real, true, alive hope every day, regardless of what unfurls at or in me. So come on into the spot we're co-creating for a few minutes and see what you see. Hear what you hear. Don't try too hard to hold on to new proper nouns when they come. It'll all make sense eventually. Today, I want to explore something truly fascinating that's emerging in our collective conversation. A seeming paradox where some walls are crumbling while others are being frantically built higher. On one hand, we're witnessing surprising cracks in tribal thinking among right-wing figures. On the other, we're seeing intensifying in-group, out-group dynamics with disturbing incidents of othering and dehumanization. Regarding my use of the word tribal really quickly, if you allow, I want to be clear that I'm not using this word in an appropriating way. It can be a controversial word to use casually because of the ways in which it has come to represent a deeply personal, deeply communal, deeply spiritual identity on the part of indigenous groups who are so often marginalized, but who have actually stayed connected to, or who are perhaps even living with their people, their tribe, right? So I don't love it when folks who aren't identified as members of an indigenous tribe as such refer to their chosen family as tribe, like their group of friends, right? I mean, to each his own, and suit yourself, and I will not judge you for doing this, but it doesn't hit me right for me. Um, that usage kind of feels like I'm borrowing the power and the history and the sacredness of a native tribe and applying all that meaning to my friend group. So, but rather here, what I'm trying to use the word for, I'm not referring to any particular group or set of people, but rather the lowercase use of the word, if you will, describing, if you'll allow Webster to jump in here, a social division consisting of families or communities linked by social, economic, religious, or blood ties with a common culture and a common dialect. That common culture and dialect is so key here, right? And in that sense, we have a tribal situation in our country. I'll talk about that a bit today. So this use of the word tribe then is rather about those group identities. And today I'll talk about the ways that when defended with extremity or hate or exclusion, tribal thinking or tribal behavior or tribal orientation, which are inherently powerful because of the numbers, can then become incredibly destructive. So I promise, even though we're going to wade into some of these contradictory and sometimes shadowy waters, we won't stay there long. We'll find our way to actionable hope because that's what we do. And I promise the bodies above have a lot to tell us about why these seemingly opposite trends are actually twin expressions of the same moment. So, first, let's look at our first development, which is the light that is poking through and expanding cracks in our media and political landscape. Have you noticed how some previously rigid divisions seem to be dissolving just the littlest bit lately? So one example is Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, the gay and happily married father of two, the veteran, the lover of infrastructure, right, and democracy, who for some time has made it his business to walk across the aisle and engage thoughtfully in conversations with people who don't vote like him or see themselves as belonging to a very different tribe than him. He tends to be received wherever he goes as reasonable and thoughtful and good, but his appearances have so far been limited to network cable shows and the like. Last week, though, this man went on to one of these bro podcasts, these Manosphere podcasts we've heard so much about. There's a couple of things I've learned recently about these Manosphere podcasts. I don't, to be really honest, I don't listen to much of them. I've been reading quite a bit about them, and then I've been reading transcripts of them. And I'm trying to, voice is powerful, right? So I don't listen to the actual voice. But what I'm trying to understand, what I'm trying to get my hands around is how does it work, right? Like what's the coin of the realm? And we know that it works based on authenticity, but what it also works on is long conversations with new words and new vocabulary and new meanings and new ideas that are presented in a new way, I should say. Um, and the ideas are then contextualized to what matters most to the host and their listeners, right? So if we take the sort of dialect and culture of the tribal dialect and culture of the left, if you will, and we notice the phrases and the words that have so much subtext and so much meaning to this tribe, when we take those words and that dialect to another place, to another community, to another culture, those words and those phrases have been really strategically redefined, right? So they no longer mean what we think they mean. And there's no right meaning of words, right? Like linguists know this. Like the way language evolves is that like eventually a thing just means the thing a lot of people think it means. Like it doesn't mean what the professor said 40 years ago it meant. It means what it's being used as now, right? And so a lot of the phrases and language and even values of the left have been repurposed, and even to the point of the word tribe, reappropriated, taken, and leveraged in new ways by the right. And so Pete, who is sort of center left, when he goes from his land to the other land, he does not bring this language, this vocabulary that has so much alternate subtext in this other place, in this other culture, right? He comes and brings common language, common vocabulary, words that are universally understood to mean about the same thing, right? Because the worlds are so divided that, again, language has different meanings in different places. And so he brings language he can trust his listeners, the listeners of these podcasts, can access. So he sits down on this podcast called Flagrant, hosted by a young man named Andrew Schultz, who you may not have heard of, but many, 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 many people have. He's a very popular figure, very popular podcast, right? So Pete sits down with Andrew and his buddies for 3 hours. Like, think about that compared to sort of the traditional route of like a canned 7-minute interview, right? So, and out of this format where long conversation and deep connection and thoughtful discourse and time for questions and time for poking and time for thinking are the coin of the realm, Pete's just incredibly comfortable, used literally zero jargon, and just laid out argument after argument after argument for things that matter to him and that he knows matters to the people he's talking to. Because we're all human and we all have the same basic needs and wants for our people, for our kids, right? So instead of the usual talking points and those gotcha moments that we're so used to, this group of men had an authentic, nuanced conversation that resonated deeply with an audience not recently receptive to some of these ideas. Watch amazing news. The more rich, real, honest discourse we can cause in this world, the more we're going to expand the possibility of hearing each other. Even more surprisingly, we are seeing figures who have been pillars of right-wing media questioning positions that would have been untouchable just months ago. Ben Shapiro, who you may not know, is one of the most extreme and, in my opinion, unreasonable and unkind voices on all things culture wars, the rise of the patriarchy, an intolerant Christian nationalism, a firmly anti-immigrant stance, right? He's been a major voice defending nearly every action of the Trump administration. But this weekend, we got to see tape of this man sharing what he learned recently when he traveled to Ukraine to interview President Zelensky personally. In this recording, Shapiro miraculously acknowledges Russia's true intentions, which is not to resolve a, quote, border dispute, which is what the far right in our country is often calling this when they're talking about this war, because they have adopted Kremlin talking points, right? But rather, Shapiro in this video names that Russia seeks to dominate or to subjugate or to erase Ukraine, he says, in order to rebuild that Russian empire and to return his border, Putin's border, to at least the very gates of Europe, at the least, right? So while Shapiro, like all rational people in the West, was once aligned with the notion of protecting our allies who are fighting for democracy, he responded in a tribal way when the Trump administration, or even Trump in the during the previous administration, turned on Ukraine for a variety of reasons we do not need to go into at the moment, but rather seemed to seek an alliance with Russia. So now, however, we're seeing a stark departure from that more Russia sympathetic position common in his circles. There is a sign of oxygen hitting the ranks, y'all. Ben Shapiro, if you don't know, has a podcast that is commonly in the top rankings of all podcasts in the country. In fact, he's rated 16th in the first quarter of 2025 in the country. Right? So a lot of people are hearing this. Another sign of shifting sands came this week as another prominent voice of extremism in favor of Trumpian politics, a guy named Charlie Kirk, expressed concerns about grabbing people off the street for writing op-eds. His exact words were, "We run a little bit of a problem if we're going to say that the criteria to get your visa revoked is writing an op-ed." Now, that might be an exaggeration by somebody. Yeah, right. And if the op-ed was not even critical of America, but it was just critical of a foreign country, he questions. That's not nothing, right? It's an important development. Candace Owens, another wildly popular podcaster, this time she's Black, she's female, she's conventionally attractive, right? But this right-wing figure who enjoys and spreads anti-Semitic tropes, she espouses conspiracy theories related to LGBTQ. She downplays the impact of slavery and racism. She denounces Black Lives Matter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So again, very popular podcast. She's 31 on Apple today when I looked. Candace this week questions whether we should let Harvard decide who and how it educates. I need you to understand how disagreement or disloyalty or, like individualized rational thought is just not commonly done in these circles. The line is typically held and has been for years. It's an impenetrable wall, right? So this is part of why we say we live in bubbles, and why when we talk to someone from a different bubble, they literally are working with a completely different set of information. Well, the bubble is, at the very least, working with a small leak of air, officially, as logic and more information is becoming more and more and more available in commentary and in discourse. Joe Rogan, even, literally the #1 podcast in the country, like literally almost every day. In many regards, from the perspective of many, someone who actually became a kingmaker in 2024. He's been advocating for due process on his podcasts regarding the disappearance of immigrants and refugees. So it's important to notice that these are not minor shifts. They represent genuine cracks in the tribal divides that have defined our discourse for years. And they are happening in spaces that operate outside the conventional media ecosystem. Long-form, unscripted podcast conversations where people can actually explore ideas rather than continue to perform, right? And harden the walls of faction, right? So tighten the boundary between my tribe and that of a diverse and complicated civil society. to rejoin that society and to depart from the acceptable talking points, which for years have required a sort of unthinking following within their tribe. All the tribes, by the way, in this country, all the tribes have required compliance with a set of rules. Things we say, things we do not say, right? It's cracking. Okay, so in one way, we see this ironclad information space showing cracks in the foundation. And we see bits of this wall falling off the structure. But at the very same time, we are witnessing deeply troubling examples of parts of that wall being built higher, divisions hardening, and rocks being thrown from the other side. So on one side, you've got citizens poking holes and peeking through. And on the other side, you've got those who are slapping cement and laying bricks and throwing weapons over the side as they strengthen and build their boundary between themselves and their other. Just this weekend, I don't know if you saw it, there's this horrible video circulating of this extremist faction of young Orthodox men in Crown Heights harassing and physically threatening a woman they perceived as Muslim or protester. There's like 50 of them, 100, I don't know how many, but a lot of them, a lot of them. And there's one cop in the video that I could see and one woman. And he's kind of got his arm a little bit around her and she's got a scarf over her face. And they're kind of hustling away at the front of this mob. And the mob, this group of angry young men is screaming at her, yelling at her, pushing her, daring to get close enough under the cop's arm and pushing this woman. Eventually, somebody throws something at her head, right? So they're yelling and pushing and throwing things. Well, she's moving as quickly as she can to get away from them as their behavior and their words and their volume escalate in truly terrifying ways. It seems so simple and so profoundly awful that it brought to my mind Anne Applebaum's teachings on how authoritarian movements and the ways that they foster the demonization of an outgroup who can unify the in-group and make it more possible to control that in-group. Because I've now been desensitized to unconstitutional, immoral, unethical moves by the powerful to eradicate this outgroup that I have grown to despise. This, of course, makes it easier for the powerful to move on to the next outgroup, like in Harry Potter. I will be making Harry Potter references from time to time, and if you haven't read the books, I'm so sorry, and I encourage you to do so. But I do want to say, this week in particular, that my adoration of Harry Potter and the original 7 books has nothing to do, and I mean nothing, with an endorsement or appreciation for the, in my opinion, hateful and ironically othering and seemingly escalating perspective of the author and where she is at this moment in time vis-a-vis trans people. I just don't think it's nice to be mean to a group of people. That's sort of the whole damn point. But ironically, I will cling to the narrative that she built years ago, right? When first she's the book's about bigotry, right? So at first when the problem is in the community is in the book is the muggle born, people who are born to people who aren't magical. Next, it's the muggle sympathetic, otherwise known as blood traders, that are the targets, right? So we have the original outgroup, and then once you have the outgroup kind of sectioned off, then you've got a group, and then you have to kind of peel off parts of that group in order to make that group more and more pure over time. These themes come up throughout literature because bigotry and authoritarianism are predictable as fuck. It's just harder to see when we're living it. So we see these men harassing this woman and providing her with what looks like a truly terrorizing experience because what? Because she was proximal to a protest against something that matters to them, right? Who is next? We've seen the same phenomenon in the treatment of migrants. The dehumanization of the other is a political strategy, is well alive there, right? And in fact, the administration has weirdly doubled down in this case where they made a mistake. The case of Kelmar Armando Abrego Garcia they're now demonizing him and asking their followers to decide that simply because this man is an immigrant, because this man is a member of this out group, he should be mistreated. He should really be disregarded or discarded. What's striking to me is that these incidents aren't isolated. They're part of a larger pattern where certain groups are being labeled as acceptable targets. In the US right now, those groups include Muslims, critics of Israel, immigrants who are not yet citizens, perpetrators of the curse of DEI, right? The list goes on. Women seeking reproductive health care, surgeons providing it. The key, though, is to deprive someone of their humanity to help with your political ends, right? So most of the people sort of staffing these campaigns of othering aren't being thoughtful about the ways in which those campaigns tend to choose a next victim. And then that next out group is, by definition, someone who is currently in the in group, currently on your side of the line. Will it be you next? So the paradox we're seeing is that this intensification of the in-group, out-group dynamics is happening simultaneously while we see the cracking of tribal lines we were looking at earlier. So the barrier between the worlds is fraying, and in some spots, while little mice work day and night to strengthen it, and others. What is that about? How can we make sense of these seemingly contradictory trends? Well, this is where the planets come in, because what's happening in the heavens right now reveals the energies of this paradoxical moment. So there's several major transits. Transit is a vocab word that means planets on the move, doing stuff, affecting stuff down here. When they move or get to new angles that are significant, we call it a transit. So there's multiple transits happening right now that help explain this dual phenomenon of walls crumbling and rising higher at the same time. First and most significant is Neptune at 1 degree of Aries, meaning just inside the door to the skyland of Aries. We've talked about this a bit and we'll continue to explore it because Neptune cycles take about 14 years. And they tend to have a major effect on the collective when it shifts. So we're in this transitional phase of this monumental change. You're like, yeah, no shit. But Neptune takes about 165 years to complete its cycle through the full zodiac, the full circle in the sky. You can, if you want to, kind of think of it as a clock in the sky, like facing you if you look up. And so it's a clock where the general trend of traffic is counterclockwise, not clockwise. So if you're looking at a clock in the sky, just know that Neptune, this giant icy blue planet so far away that affects us so much, has moved, and it now matters for our collective unconscious. So Neptune governs dreams, illusions, collective myths. It's the planet of both spiritual vision and delusion. You guys, it governs the stories we tell ourselves. And importantly, critically, it governs the stories we believe. Have you ever completely believed a story that turned out to not be true? Come on, you have. We all have. Well, I mean, look at Santa Claus, actually. A perfect example from the Christian world or even the secular world of Christian adjacent traditions. So Santa Claus is a story, and we are told this story when we're young, right? And if you performed this lie as a parent or a person who loves young people, you know that it's a story that has holes in it. But a child who's like 5, 6, or 7, or even 8 will ignore at first the signs that it's not real and cling to the illusion. Eventually, some hangers-on, I had one of these, will eventually carry on with the delusion because they think we need it, right? They're participating in the lie for us at some point. And maybe we do need it. Maybe we did. Well, that's Neptune. The stories, the dreams, the illusions that serve a purpose, right? When Neptune is in Pisces, its home sign, those dreams and those illusions tend to be diffuse, nebulous, so big we can't see them. Think of how over the past 14 years we've been swimming in increasingly isolated media bubbles, each with their own version of reality, right? So the dream planet's been in the dream skyland, and it was dreamy as fuck. But now that Neptune has entered Aries, a cardinal sign, meaning an action sign, a fire sign of pioneering and impatient energy, These illusions are starting to burn away. Aries demands clarity and direct action. It cannot tolerate the fog or even, quite frankly, the comfortable delusion that Pisces allows. So on top of that, man, look who's heading straight for Aries country. This guy's Saturn. Mr. Serious, Mr. Boundaries, Mr. Gravity, Mr. Consequence. That's right. He's right there. And he's going to have an impact on all this too. So we'll talk about him. We'll talk about him more in a little bit, but he's a huge part of this story. So the second juicy and fun factor is a planet we have not talked about as much on here, which is Mercury. Mercury, unless you've been living under a rock, you have heard of Mercury because of the much ballyhooed Mercury retrograde. All planets retrograde, but Mercury's in our face doing it all the time and doing it fast and noticeably because it's so close to us, really affects us. So Venus and Mercury are right there. And when they do stuff, it affects us quickly, personally, precisely. And the vocabulary word retrograde just means it looks to us standing on Earth like the planet is suddenly moving backwards in the sky. It isn't. We'll do the science of that another time, but it looks like it. And when it looks like it, it has an effect. And it has an effect. I could, again, explain this astronomically, but it has an effect. So if the general flow of traffic is counterclockwise and Mercury goes retrograde, it looks like it's going clockwise in the opposite direction. And when that happens, my goodness, it affects us. Mercury is the messenger god Hermes, the one who brought us messages from the gods, now also rules communication, technology, contracts, the mind, learning, intelligence, even transportation. Remember those winged feet on Hermes? So Mercury traditionally, the protector of travelers, merchants, and thieves. When Mercury retrogrades, we tend to see disruptions and undoings of all these things, of all these trades, of all these parts of life. So communication gets more gobbled. And I just find it fascinating that as these clearer, crisper communications are emerging, we can look up and notice that Mercury is not only moving direct once again, the way we like it, but it has even cleared the spot on the circle, the spot in the sky where it went backwards in the first place. We call this clearing the shadow. Deep, right? And so as Mercury clears its shadow, and Neptune, while Mercury's been dipping back, has moved into Aries, and Mercury's now there also. The world is different as Mercury moves proudly, strongly into the light. This supports the kind of authentic conversation we're seeing in these long form podcast formats. Cool, right? Now the dream is slowly breaking. The communication is slowly clarifying. But while this conflict, while this struggle with the outgroups, while this violence, while this anger, while this targeting and even tolerating of cruelty, well, while Mercury clears the shadow and Neptune moves into the skyland of Aries, we've got another couple of dudes doing other stuff in another part of the sky. So at the same time, we have Mars, Mr. War, Mr. Violence, Mr. Action, Mr. Aggression, in Leo, the skyland of me, mine own. He's opposite Pluto, the planet of depth, intensity. You might even say trauma, but certainly transformation. And Aquarius, the skyland of, on its best day, humanitarianism, intellectualism, connectivity, right? But some of the lower forms of the skyline include emotional distance or aloofness, an unpredictability, a rebelliousness, and impulsiveness. So the planet of intensity and trauma and the skyland of rebelliousness, combined with the emotional absence, can be a rough combo when combined with working in opposition to the planet of anger and action. And the skyland of, in its lowest form, Leo can be selfish. So selfish, me-centered aggression combined with trauma-informed emotional detachment and impulsiveness. I mean, man, this is quite a brew. So we're seeing this powerful confrontation between individual expression and collective power at the gates of us and them, mine and not mine, our side and wrong side. I mean, you're even seeing that we matter, you don't business when you see the border czar, whose name I have chosen to forget today. This week, answered questions for the regarding the deportation of a 2-year-old American citizen and cancer patient was deported against his father's will and without any medicine or medical guidance, saying the borders are saying on television something to the effect of, well, not my problem. Blame his mother. She came here illegally and had him on our soil. He is not mine. This aspect was exact last week, and it creates intense power struggles around identity and belonging, around care and lack of care. Mars in Leo wants to assert its unique voice, while Pluto in Aquarius represents transformative collective forces. When they're in opposition, the tension between individual expression and group identity can manifest as both authentic dialogue on one hand and extremist, uncaring reaction on the other. And we, my dear friends, saw both. So you see what we're experiencing collectively. It isn't contradictory at all. It's actually perfectly aligned with this complex astrological weather. Neptune's shift from Pisces to Aries is dissolving old tribal illusions, while the Mars-Pluto opposition is creating intense power dynamics and even violence around identity and belonging. To understand what these planetary movements might mean for us, it helps to look at history. Times when similar weather in the sky, in the cosmos, coincided with significant shifts in human consciousness. So if we're talking about Neptune, the dream planet, and his ingress or his shift into the Aries skyland of action, we're always going to end up talking about the start of the Civil War. That is the quickest signifier people tend to get to when they're wondering about this. When we're trying to understand what happened the last time Neptune moved neighborhoods from Pisces to Aries, we see that looking at the 165-year cycle, the last time it occurred was 1861 and 1862. In fact, if you'll believe it, Neptune entered Aries on April 13th, 1861, which was the day after the American Civil War began. This timing is not coincidental. As Neptune moves into Aries, the South's deeply held belief that their fight was about states' rights rather than slavery begins to dissolve. The Civil War forced a confrontation with the reality that many Southerners had constructed, that there was a God-given right to own other people, or if you were poor, then to be significantly better than other people who were eligible for slavery, which in this country at that time was Black people. So the delusion that I have the right to own people or at least be intellectually, socially, legally better than these people, that dream caused so much certainty that a war was started with great gusto and defensiveness and aggression and this silly assumption that the dream was enough to win a war. And so over the course of the next 4 years, Neptune, as he does, moved further and further into Aries and helped to bring the truth into stark relief, even for all of those formerly true believers. What's fascinating is that as Neptune moves deeper into Aries in 1866, the lost cause, the Confederacy, emerges, which is a pseudo-historical negationist myth claiming the Confederate cause was just and heroic and not centered on slavery. This represents both the dissolution of the dissolving of one delusion, the pre-war justification, and the creation of a new, smaller, weaker, less popular, less believed one that until recently, as Neptune came all the way back around again, held less sway. But you'll notice that part of the narrative, the 10 or 15 years prior to this one, you've seen the rise again of that sort of myth, right? The sort of attachment to and gleeful resurrection of the symbols of the South. In fact, the Southern fantasy of economic independence through cotton and slavery dissolved completely. As Neptune progressed into Aries and the war raged on, by the end of the combat, the Southern economy was devastated, with its share of national wealth falling from about 30% before the war to about 12% afterwards. proving the unsustainability of an agrarian economic model rooted in oppression and hierarchy. So sure, dreams dissolve. And when you add to that the other element that we've got brewing, which is Saturn. Now listen, in the wild west of the skies, Saturn is 100% the sheriff. We can all think of sheriffs where the sheriff, we can all think of movies where the sheriff is the good guy, like Wyatt Earp, right? And we can all think of movies where the sheriff is the bad guy, like Gene Hackman, may he rest in peace, as little Bill Daggett in Unforgiven. Right? So just like all of us and all the planets, everybody and everything has a shadow side. So we can think of the dangers and the delights of the Wild West sheriff when we're trying to understand how Saturn affects things. And so when Saturn is approaching Neptune, as Neptune's doing its work in Aries to undo the dream, as it is now. And friends, when I say approaching, I mean approaching slowly. The dance for them to truly get together will not be exact until next year. So we're going to be seeing this phenomenon of serious forces affecting the dream force for a while. But Saturn nearing Neptune does help with this dream breaking stuff. But looking at previous Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, we see not just the Civil War, we also see the 1989 conjunction coinciding with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, communism. So first, firm, hard, whole boundaries and divisions protecting a delusion with expanding holes were suddenly eroded and dissolved as rigid structures that had seemed permanent for decades suddenly crumbled. Earlier, 1952 and 1953, Stalin dies when Saturn and Neptune are together, which of course contributes to the long, slow 36-year slog towards that final dissolution in 89. In each case, Saturn-Neptune conjunctions coincide with the dissolution of rigid ideological structures and the birth of new visions, some idealistic and liberatory, and others creating, as time and planets pass, new forms of control, to be sure. But the opportunity is what we want to focus on. So as Saturn prepares to cross that sky bridge to the next land and join Neptune in Aries, we do see, in addition to their usual sense-making of a long, seductive dream, we see the dawn also at the same time of a new zodiacal cycle. So 164 years after the launch of the Civil War, we now see Saturn, Mr. Sirius, getting into Neptune's head as he awakens from the gooey Pisces dream he's been dreaming. The current transit is particularly significant because both planets are co-present at this doorway of Aries at the dawn of the zodiacal cycle. Like the clock restarts, y'all. This suggests an even more profound dissolution of old structures and collective illusions before a new vision emerges. It is literally morning in America. So our fun project then is to notice the mood at the beginning of the war, Civil War, the waking up that happened over that time, and the really very different method for waking up that Stalin's death or the fall of the Berlin Wall had on the entire globe. What will our waking up look like this time in 25 and 26? Violence is not required. And then I'm so sorry, I have to add a little garlic and ginger to this soup still. We have to add the spice of the Mars, Mr. Conflict, and Pluto, Mr. Transformation, to this recipe for this moment in time. All these things are happening to us at the same time, right? Two significant recent Mars-Pluto oppositions were in 1939 and 2007 and 2008. Nothing going on at those times, right? When these two planets clash, we typically see intense power struggles that can manifest as both destructive conflicts and empowering breakthroughs. This aspect tends to bring karmic fault lines to the surface, where long suppressed tensions suddenly erupt. These historical patterns suggest that what we're living through, both the cracking of the tribal boundaries and the intensification of in-group, out-group dynamics, and the waking from a delusion of hierarchy and separateness, these are all part of a larger process of dissolution and rebirth. The walls that are crumbling represent outdated delusions that can no longer withstand Neptune's transition into Aries. while the walls being frantically reinforced represent desperate attempts to hold on to dissolving structures. So how do we navigate this paradoxical moment where walls are both crumbling and being reinforced? First, we can recognize that these seemingly contradictory trends are actually part of the same cosmic process. Dreamy Neptune, an action-oriented Aries, is dissolving old collective illusions, which creates both space for authentic connection with people unlike ourselves, who have arrived at this moment on a different path than yours, and anxiety that drives people to cling more tightly to rigid identities. When foundations shake, some respond by opening to new possibilities, and others desperately try to reinforce crumbling structures. Which one are you? Are you yet to be kind and welcoming to people who voted differently than you? Are you yet trying to find new language that hasn't been politicized in order to have grounded, rooted, common values conversations with people who have the t-shirt of the other tribe on? Pete Buttigieg did just that. If you go find that interview, and I strongly recommend it as a dose of fresh air and hope, you'll hear not one jargony word, not one familiar talking point, not one phrase that's been recast or twisted by his political opponents. Okay, so that's one thing. Be nice to the other side. See what happens when you accept for a moment that they were literally living somewhere other than the world you inhabited in 2024. And their world is valid. And their hearts and minds and experiences are valid. The things they're afraid of and hungry for and suspicious of are all earned, have all been come by honestly. Now listen, there are liars. There are lying liars in the lies they tell, to sort of quote Al Franken. If I'm surprised by anything, it's the number of people who are consciously on purpose contributing to the delusion of other people. Consciously on purpose. But the vast majority of our countrymen and women are not lying. They're consuming lies. And that is worthy of our compassion. Unless you've never believed a lie. Come on now. I mean, I can even think of lies that I knew were probably lies, but I liked my life the way it was, so I chose not to know the truth until I had to. Right? Just me. Well, eventually, always, the planets decide when and how to reveal lies for what they are and what energy is now rising as you witness the lie fading in the minds of people around you. Be there with food and drink and company and kindness. We can embrace Neptune and Aries, pioneering spirit that's willing to venture beyond tribal boundaries. This transit invites us to take action based on authentic values rather than loyalty to one side or the other. But it also asks us to be discerning about which visions we pursue. What in the world is the new dream, and how will we cause it collectively in a way that allows everybody to feel like they're part of it and want to stay? The in-group becomes enormous, right? There is no out-group. There might be a couple turkeys left on the perimeter who can't join or don't want to join. But we, the entire collective, no matter what, whether or not we have a star in our sneech bellies, right? We all get to decide and recreate the reality. We can use the Mars-Pluto opposition to channel intense energy into transformative action rather than destructive conflict. So when Mars and Pluto oppose each other, the key is to direct that power that comes. Do you feel power now? Do you feel a surge of power now? That's Mars and Pluto. And does that surge of power come from like dark things you've known, hard things you've known, things that made you your most true deep self, right? And you want to act with that? That's the Mars and Pluto opposition. The key is to direct that power towards breaking through internal barriers rather than attacking perceived enemies. Watch your language online even. Like, don't be mean anymore. Don't be unkind anymore. Don't categorize people anymore. Finally, we get to be grounded, rooted in what truly matters amidst cosmic turbulence. We can connect to this physical world, to our bodies. The sun has entered new skyland, and in that skyland, we can connect to the physical world, to our bodies, to simple pleasures. We can find stability now. It is time for that. It is time for every single one of us as we enter May to find the root of our plant, right? Not through rigid control, but through sensory connection to what is real and life-sustaining. Y'all, we continue to live through madness, but April is closing, and we now have a shot at our dream. Can you feel it? I know that you can. So my annual way of feeling it, of connecting to what's most true, is to spend a lot of time at the sea in the summer. I was raised in Rhode Island and Cape Cod, and my mother's still there. And so we all get to the sea for that resourcing, that grounding, that remembering of who we are. And when we're there, we get synced with the tides. You can always see this moment when the tide reaches its furthest point before it begins to recede. You're wondering if you have to move your chair. It's coming, like it's coming higher and higher. And you're like, ah, shit. You start packing up. And the water feels like it's going to just rise indefinitely. But you guys, it doesn't. It doesn't. Before we can see it, powerful currents are already shifting beneath the surface. That is where we are right now, at a precious and overwhelming fulcrum point between dissolving and becoming. Or like when you're mixing baking ingredients, you gather all your ingredients, some flour, some sugar, some fluid like milk or oil. You combine them, boundaries dissolve. What was once separate becomes integrated. And importantly, for a time, it's neither solid nor liquid, but something in between, right? A state of potential. Do you remember staring through the oven window as a kid, waiting for time to unfold? It just seems like it's not going to. It's going on too long, and this thing is not yet a cake. So you go do something else. But when you turn that oven light off in the darkness, while heat is applied, something new emerges. Neither flour, nor milk, nor sugar, but cake. We are in that in-between state now. We are in the part where you have turned off the light in the oven and you have gone out to watch. What? Welcome back, Cotter. Shall I date myself? The old ingredients are tribal identities, our media bubbles, our rigid certainties. They're dissolving into each other. It is messy and uncomfortable. And quite frankly, what has kept me sane, what has kept me whole was my in-group status, right? Was the group I knew myself to be a part of and the group I knew I didn't want to be a part of. So allowing the boundaries of these groups to dissolve, allowing ourselves to become cake with other people who were in the wrong bowl before, right? Some of us are trying to keep the flour separate from the milk, to maintain boundaries that are already dissolving. Others are stirring enthusiastically, eager for something new to emerge. But the process itself, this alchemical transformation from separate ingredients to integrated whole, is what matters the most. Neptune in Aries is turning up the heat. It's asking us to stop clinging to ingredients that are already mixed and instead focus on what's being created. The cake we are baking together will nourish us far more than its separate components ever could. In her essay, The White Album, Joan Didion writes about another time of disillusion and confusion, the 60s. And she says, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. We interpret what we see, select the most workable of the multiple choices. We live entirely by the imposition of a narrative line, upon disparate images, by the ideas with which we have learned to freeze the shifting phantasmagoria, which is our actual experience. Didion captures something essential about how humans create meaning through narrative. When our collective narratives dissolve, as they are now under Neptune in Aries, we feel profoundly disoriented. Some respond by clinging more tightly to a familiar story, even as evidence mounts. Others open to new narratives that might better explain our actual experience. Chinua Achebe describes the ways in which our fears and our insecurities can grow into these delusions and into these behaviors that we can come to regret. Of his main character, Achebe says, perhaps down in his heart, Okonkwo was not a cruel man, but his whole life was dominated by fear, the fear of failure and of weakness. It was deeper and more intimate than the fear of evil and capricious gods and of magic, the fear of the forest and of the forces of nature, malevolent, red in the tooth and claw. Okonkwo's fear was greater than these. It was not external, but lay deep within himself. Yeah, we are dealing with real, human, tragic, corrupting human fear and consciousness of that fear and the bitterness it has caused while it was rising. And the poet Rumi reminds us the wound is the place where the light enters, right? As our tribal boundaries crack and our collective illusions dissolve, painful though it might be, we create openings for new light, new understanding, new connection with each other across our fears, across our schadenfreude, across our resentments. Let your wounds be the place where light enters you as you open to those we almost lost. As we close today, I want to offer three things. First, an action. Seek out conversation across boundaries. Not debate, not persuasion, but genuine dialogue. Find someone with whom you disagree and approach them with genuine curiosity. Be like Pete. Listen, not to respond, but to understand. Neptune and Aries invites us to pioneer new forms of connection beyond tribal thinking. Don't wish they listened to your favorite pundit podcasts. Wish you knew how to say it in a new way. Mercury is clear of her shadow. What is she doing to your ability to communicate the new dream? Second, a practice. Notice both the walls crumbling and the walls rising in your own life. Where are you reinforcing boundaries out of fear? Can you bring compassion and awareness to both processes without judgment? What are you afraid of? Lately in my writing in the morning, I've been doing this little exercise where I'm asking myself, what is the source of my joy today? And what is the source of my fear? You would be surprised at what you cough up. You'd be surprised how much your behavior and your voice will change in a day when you confess your fears, even quietly, even only to yourself in the morning. And finally, some inspiration from Jane Flanders' poem, The House That Fear Built, Warsaw, 1943. I'll just share a little bit of it. I am the boy with his hands raised over his head in Warsaw. I am the soldier whose rifle is trained on the boy with his hands raised over his head. I am the woman with the lowered gaze who fears the soldier. I am the man in the overcoat who loves the woman. I am the stranger who photographs the man in the overcoat. The crowd of which I am each part moves on beneath my window, for I am the crone too, who shakes her sheets over every street in the world, muttering, "What's this? What's this?" We are each of them, y'all. We are each character in the play. We are each personality in the nightmare. We are each personality in the undoing of the nightmare. To know that we are simultaneously the boy, the soldier, the woman taking a photograph, the man loving her, the old woman overhead, right? To know that we are each of these allows us to have more compassion for ourselves and the fear inside of us and the behaviors those fears might have caused, but also to see and have compassion for the fear inside other people. If you would like to understand how these planetary patterns are affecting you personally, it would be my great honor to look into it with you. I offer readings that help you navigate your unique relationship with these energies, your unique assignment for this life of yours and for this time in which we find ourselves. My email is in the episode description, so come, let's talk and let's see what we see. Oh, and you guys, can you please follow me in all the places, including YouTube and Blue Sky and the Skyland of Instagram? In most places, it's either the name of the podcast or the username is Direct Station Key. Until, my dear friends, next time, remember that while Neptune is in Aries, it is dissolving old boundaries. It's also pioneering new visions. Our task is to discern which walls need to fall and which boundaries deserve respect. In this paradoxical moment, may you find both freedom and connection and excitement about what we get to create next as we navigate these shifting tides together. Be well, be conscious, be kind. I'll see you soon.